This episode of Reading Trek is brought to you by our patrons. You too can support this vibrant, fan-based podcast network by visiting patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions. For as little as $1 a month, Patreons gain exclusive early access to some of our unedited shows, interviews, and even get to join in on exclusive Patreon-only chats. We have lots more Patreon content on the way that you won't want to miss, so visit patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions. Be sure to mention that Reading Trek sent you.
Put down that remote, set your phaser to stun, and pick up that paperback. Welcome to Lucky Number Episode 13 of Reading Trek, a Star Trek Book Club podcast and proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. My name is Marty, Allee, and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful William Conlin. How are you doing today, Will?
Oh, I am feeling wonderful, and I think you're wonderful too, Marty. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you.
Wonderful.
A hot day here in California. It's like 105 or something.
Yeah, I'm right at about 100
when we
too.
go to STLV in a couple weeks. How many days are we as of this recording?
As of recording today, I believe we are 24 days out, so a little over 3 weeks away.
Wow.
Yeah, looking forward to it. There's going to be some great people there and a lot of literature present. I think a lot of Trek authors. They just recently announced a whole slate of literary people who are going to be visiting throughout the convention. Very excited for that.
I can't wait. And of course, if you see us when you're in SCLV, we'll give you a bookmark.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we're going to have bookmarks, we're going to have buttons, but you got to promise to follow us on social media if you want a button. Speaking of all that, Marty, why don't you tell us about our social media and where people can learn more about the podcast?
If you want to learn more about the podcast or follow us online, you can find us most active on Twitter at ReadingTrek. You can also find us on Facebook. You can give us a like there as well. And if you're enjoying our shows, we would love it if you would hop onto iTunes and give us a star rating and review. That'll help us gain some visibility and help more people find this show. And we would love you forever.
Yes, indeed. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, always please consider going on Patreon and supporting us. Even if you just put in $1 a month, it helps the network and the content that we produce. And it's all up from here. We can just keep making more and more stuff and more shows on the way. And if you're a Star Trek fan, there's just nothing better than sharing in this community.
For those who are new to the podcast, we are a book club podcast working our way through the Star Trek Expanded Universe one novel at a time, discussing the characters, plot writing, and piecing it into the larger Trek universe as we pull out the meanings and messages of the text. Although we do encourage you to read along with us, the show was designed to give all Trek fans a way to journey through the EU together, even if you haven't read the books. Today we will be discussing Star Trek Invasion, The Final Fury.
That's the book. I know it's a book. The book.
Will, you're going to have to help me out with this author name because I will totally butcher it.
I'm guessing Dafydd Ab Hugh, which is a pen name, of course. So why don't you tell us a little more about Dafydd?
Well, that is his pen name. He was born as David Friedman in 1960. He's a science fiction author known for writing fiction and media franchises in the 1990s, including several novels for the Star Trek franchise. He also co-wrote 4 novels associated with the video game Doom with fellow science fiction writer Brad Lineweaver. This is his 3rd Star Trek novel, and he would go on to write 4 more. Will, when and where does The Final Fury take place?
The question isn't where we are. It's when we are.
The Final Fury takes place in 2371 between seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Voyager. Now, we're going to get to our plot summary, so black alert, spoilers for The Final Fury are ahead.
Black alert. Black alert.
Take it away, Will.
All right. In the conclusion of the 4-part Invasion series, the crew of the USS Voyager, stranded on the far side of the Delta Quadrant, encounters a Starfleet distress beacon in a nearby solar system. Attempting to pinpoint the location, they find a planet with 27 billion life forms and an artificial moon that is taking energy from the local sun. Paris and Kim attempt to find out what the artificial moon is for and discover that it is one giant machine with an unknown purpose. Unaware of what has transpired in the Alpha Quadrant with the USS Enterprise D and the battle at Furies Point, Janeway, Tuvok, and Neelix beam down to the planet under the guise of a trade ship. Upon encountering the Furies, Janeway and Tuvok are decimated by their ability to project fear. Their ruse is exposed and they are taken to a prison cell. Meanwhile, above, Chakotay and Voyager are chased by Fury ships, forcing them to fly into the sun and pretend they have committed suicide. Janeway, Tuvok, and Neelix, using a phaser and 2 communicators that Neelix hid in his boot, break out of the cell and use a primitive Fury computer to locate the quote-unquote unclean that was transmitting the distress signal. After breaking him out and being chased by Furies, they are all beamed aboard Voyager, and the Starfleet officer is treated. He is severely malnourished, injured, and emotionally weak. Through a mind meld, Tuvok discovers he is Lieutenant Redbay from the Enterprise D. After recovering slightly, Redbay briefs the Voyager crew on what happened in the Alpha Quadrant and breaks down crying, describing what the Furies' fear weapon can do. He also reveals the Furies' plan to make their sun go supernova and use the energy filtered through the artificial moon to create a wormhole that will transport the Fury planet and its 27 billion inhabitants directly to the Alpha Quadrant. With their size, numbers, and the fear weapon, the Voyager crew hypothesizes they will conquer the quadrant in short order. Janeway must now face a choice: either let the Furies conquer the Alpha Quadrant, or figure a way to make the supernova destroy the Fury planet and kill all 27 billion of them. They concoct a plan using Torres and Redbay on a shuttle while Voyager acts as a decoy. Well on the artificial moon, Redbay and Torres manage to adjust the Furies' black hole device to send them in the opposite direction of the Alpha Quadrant, perhaps even to another galaxy. Redbay and Torres are severely injured, and the Doctor has to make a triage decision to save Torres. Redbay dies. With the Furies no longer a threat to the Alpha Quadrant, Voyager continues on its way home. The end.
Yay, well done.
Thank you. So, let's get right into it, Marty. We've now covered the 3 other Invasion books. We started on a high point with the first one, kind of hit a valley, kept on going down. Where do you think we wound up at the end of the series?
I thought the back half of this novel was actually pretty okay, pretty solid. Not quite as good as the first novel in this series, but it had its moments. I've got a lot of bookmarked tabs in my book right now, so that's always a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? Where do you think we ended up?
I still don't think we ever got back to where we were with the first book, but I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it very much. As a series, I think it's definitely 90s Trek.
Yeah,
It's not quite the caliber in which we're getting in the current novels that we've been covering of late, but it is also enjoyable. It fits within the confines of the series in which it was made.
I absolutely agree. But other than how it held up to the other books, what were your first reactions to this novel?
Well, I mean, I'm partial to it in the fact that Voyager was one of my Trek series that I actually watched when it was originally on the air, and I love Voyager, and Voyager's got a very special place in my heart. So I think I had an advantage at that point. I liked the way a lot of the characters were written. I wasn't a huge fan of Janeway's writing in this. It didn't feel like Kate Mulgrew to me. I didn't hear her voice in this, and I didn't like some of the, even on her worst day, I didn't find her testiness in this book to be the same as the way she was on the series.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because there's a couple characters who just felt a little bit off, and I don't know if that's because this book was probably written before Voyager had even beginning airing, considering it's so early in the series.
Mm-hmm.
Commander Chakotay seemed a little off, because there's moments where he, we can get into this a little bit later, but he was still kind of attached to the Maquis at this point, along with B'Elanna Torres, Torres's character was probably the most off because she was, shouting Klingon phrases here and there when she would get frustrated, but that's not who B'Elanna Torres is as a character. She, in the show, she's kind of pushed away her Klingon heritage and staying away from that. So
Mm-hmm.
that felt a little off. And I totally agree with you about what you said for Captain Janeway being a little testy and that
Yeah.
she's more patient in the show. So I wonder if that's just something because, the writer didn't really know these characters that well yet.
Yeah, truly. I think that was the case. There was one thing in chapter one that I liked as far as Janeway goes. There's a point where she's briefing and everyone stares at her and she thinks, "Oh well, I guess that's why they let me wear the 4 pips." I thought that was a funny Janeway line, but as the novel progressed, I just didn't like the direction in which we took Janeway.
No, neither did I. But that's not to say there's not great stuff to talk about in this novel. Um, there were a couple fun moments I liked. There was one where Lieutenant Paris enters the bridge and mentions the starburst maneuver, asking Chakotay, or Chakotay then asks him if he's familiar with it. I have a nodding acquaintance, Paris winks, but Chakotay did not understand the reference. However, if you watch TNG and you know that the actor who plays Tom Paris, Robert Duncan McNeil, also played a different character in TNG's The First Duty, where they attempt the starburst maneuver and get in a lot of trouble for it.
Yes. And I believe there's a reference to the starburst maneuver in one of the Kirk novels that we recently covered as well. So it's interesting that they keep bringing that up. It's very, very much a transparent aluminum situation.
Transparent aluminum?
Yeah, there were a lot of very subtle references in this book, and I highlighted a few of them. Kind of following the Trek theme, there were a lot of Alice in Wonderland references in here.
Yeah, I highlighted one of those as well.
When Janeway, Tuvok, and Neelix are going through the prison, and they're talking about the weird angles of the buildings and everything, she says, "Damn it, there's a limit to Lovecraftian geometry," she insisted to herself. Evidently, the Furies disagreed, so I like that because I like H.P. Lovecraft, and he's kind of out there in terms of the traditional science fiction, so I thought that was a great reference. And there's also a very subtle reference in here where it's a scene with B'Elanna and Janeway, where Janeway says, in regards to the Furies, that they're vast, cool, and unsympathetic. And that is a very, very close reference to get if you're a science fiction fan. That is from the first chapter of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds in describing the Martians. He describes the Martians as vast, cool, and unsympathetic intellect that is purely interested in conquering Earth. So I really like that they put that little nod in there too.
Yeah, I didn't catch that one, but that's a good one. We did get mention of Okudagrams. Nice little shout out to Mike and Denise Okuda, who have a long history with 90s era Star Trek. I want to talk about Chakotay and his attachment to the Maquis at this point. There's a moment here. At once, Chakotay realized to his astonishment that the impossible had occurred. The Starfleet ship had an entirely Maquis bridge crew. The commander smiled. My wildest dream come true. We finally stolen a Federation starship right out from under them, and we can't do anything with her. I wanted to talk about that moment for a bit because that doesn't seem like the Chakotay we know, or the Chakotay that even is in like episode 2.
Yeah, I liked the sentiment of it, but you're absolutely right. It's something where I feel like maybe it would be like a passing laugh in like Tom Paris's head or something, but that's not really who Chakotay is.
Right. I mean, all of those crew members after episode 1 like committed to being in a Starfleet crew, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I like you said, I think we can chalk a lot of this up to just not knowing where the series was going, and when this was written, it was probably before they knew really where the series was going. I think Voyager's first season, is honestly, in my opinion, the weakest season because they had to learn the most. I felt like they didn't
Yeah,
really find a groove until later in season 2.
I agree with you. I think that, I mean, it's kind of standard for all Trek shows. They really find their footing in season 2 and beyond.
You mean TNG season 1 isn't your favorite of all?
Hard pass.
Uh, yeah, there's a lot of little things in here that just don't gel for me as the way characters were developed. The one person who does seem to have a good consistency in here is Neelix. I think they kind of had Neelix pegged down from the beginning, and they did a pretty good job writing him out in here. I love the whole thing with the boot and the phaser and 2 communicators in there, because I have always thought that every time in a Trek episode where they take the communicator off of their chest, I just thought, why don't they have another communicator like built into the heel of their boot just in case?
Yeah, you would think that would be like a backup communicator would be standard issue by this point.
Yeah, and I like that Janeway blushes when he drops them out, and then she keeps asking him what else he has in there. Do you have a face cutter in there?
I don't think Janeway would blush. I think she would be like, great job. Why didn't we think of that?
Yeah, no, that's why she blushes.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, I just thought that was a funny nod to something that should be pretty obvious, especially in the 24th century.
There was also another moment with the doctor playing triage,
Mm-hmm.
and having not been in his programming, he had trouble making that decision. And I found that scene like really hilarious because they made an entire episode out of that scene in the book. I don't know if it was from the book specifically, but that
Yeah,
later became an entire episode about the doctor.
it did. Yeah,
I forget
and
the name of the episode, but
yeah, I'm blanking on it as well, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and they have to kind of rewrite his program because he breaks down through that happening. Which that triage scene, that kind of leads me up to one of my big nitpicks on this book, which is Red Bay, because in the TNG novel, we set Red Bay up and he makes this incredibly heroic thing going into the wormhole, and, Riker sings his praises and everything. He really fizzles out in this book. I mean, I expected him to come back, but I expected him to come back in more of a heroic sacrifice, and just, he dies on the operating table isn't the kind of heroic, ending that I expected for the character.
yeah, I think the author may have just done that to give the doctor more to do, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, there were parts of the novel that felt like filler to me.
yeah, pillar filler.
Hmm. Yeah, so what are some of your other thoughts on this, Marty? Do you have any favorite quotes?
I have lots of favorite quotes, but I want to talk about technology for a second.
Mm.
Technology. The comm badges were
Yes.
used as a mini computer, and I thought that was really cool. And I don't know why they haven't done this on the show yet. I'll read it to you now. "Comm badge," said the captain. "Identify your model and year." She jumped as a voice, the computer's voice, popped out of the badge. "I am a Starfleet General Issue Tang Bioelectrics Model 74A Communications Badge, manufactured at Rivendell Prime in 2362. Neelix stared. "I never knew you could do that." "I never thought of trying before," the captain smacked her lips.
Hmm.
And I felt like that moment was just kind of a wink and a nod to us, the readers.
Yep.
Just like, I didn't know you could do that. As I was thinking the very same thing.
Who'd have thought that the comm badges are actually sonic screwdrivers?
I know, that's kind of what they felt like. They were just this all powerful, perfect little tool.
Yeah, I liked that. I thought that was interesting, and obviously the fact that they could hack a much more unsophisticated computer just by setting it on there. It's a really cool aspect that they should definitely consider using in other Trek lore.
Yeah, if we ever get a series set in the 24th century again.
Well, we can hope, right?
There's also more technology I wanted to talk about, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's the whole thing with the spaceship planets.
Yes.
that they mentioned. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's no moon.
It's a space station.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. One of the things that they mentioned in there too is that, the vast differences in technology depending on where you are in the galaxy, that, this species can build artificial wormholes and a planet-sized ship that can hold 27 billion people and can conquer a quadrant, and yet they haven't developed transporter technology. So it
It's kind of
shows you
weird, yeah.
that like different anthropological growth of cultures and where they go with technology.
Yeah, I wish we could have seen more of like the planet maybe moving as a spaceship since they brought up the concept and then we didn't get any payoff from
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
However, the wormhole not necessarily making a wormhole that they travel through, but creating a wormhole around them. I thought that was a pretty cool concept as well.
Yeah. Yeah, all interesting and terrifying ideas. Do you imagine, what happened in the first novel with that solar system getting broken apart just for some ships to come through? Imagine what would happen in the Alpha Quadrant if an entire planet came through.
An entire planet like overpopulated. They had how many billions of people there?
27 billion is the number. And that, I mean, that I think was where the meat of this novel was, in Janeway's ethical, dilemma of whether or not she has to commit genocide and kill 27 billion people, and she even says that would be the most horrific single loss of life in the history of the galaxy as it is known.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that was a pretty heavy concept in this novel all the way through.
but it's good that she also doesn't have to make that choice then. They are able to send the Furies to a faraway place never to be heard from again.
As Neelix said, the view back is always sharper than the view ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the like core concepts of this book.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think honestly Neelix was probably
He's a strong character.
Neelix is not my favorite character in Voyager, and he rarely, I think, is the strongest character in even Neelix-centric episodes. I think Neelix was really good in this book.
I also thought Tom Paris was pretty good in this book.
Yeah, I liked the maneuver that he does when they're going through the planet, and Kim is just like, "I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die."
I'm glad you brought up Kim because he was another character that just kind of like wasn't himself because it seemed like they almost put Kim and Balana as the pair
Hmm.
in this novel. Did you catch on to that?
I didn't actually.
There's a moment at the end where Balana just wakes up from her operation,
Mm-hmm.
and Janeway looks at Kim and says something to the effect of like, "I'm sure you've been worried about her. You can go to sickbay and check up on her." And Kim leaves the bridge.
Interesting. Interesting. Was that
And there was a moment like that in the beginning of the book too, and I was like, "Wait, that's not what's going on here, is it?"
No, was there a point in season 1 where they were trying to pair them up?
There was like an episode where Kim flirted with her a little bit, but Kim flirts with everybody.
Yeah.
Kim flirts with holograms. I mean,
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really catch that because it's funny too because we have so much more information. I kept looking for maybe like subtleties of Torres and Paris, but obviously this is long before they got together
too
as a
early.
couple. Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't really like Kim, didn't really like Torres, Chakotay, Janeway. I mean, the only characters I really, really liked were Neelix and Tom Paris, but we didn't get much out of them, unfortunately.
Now, how about Tuvok? Let's talk about Tuvok for a minute.
I know you have lots of words to say about Tuvok. You mentioned it to me earlier. You sent me a text that said Tuvok's annoying the out of you.
Oh, that's right. That was a while back, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tuvok because, I mean, Tuvok is just annoying in this book. He kind of redeems himself towards the later half, where he, like, when the scene in Janeway's captain's quarters, I kind of feel a little better. I think he's kind of gained more composure. But when he's down on the planet and he's just like, a hunk of meat standing there, it just bothers me so much because I feel like even in the midst of his terror, he could probably pull some knowledge out of the logic, and it takes him so long to deduce that it's the Furies. And that just doesn't seem
Yeah.
like any Vulcan that we know on Star Trek at all.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. All right, do you have any other thoughts about any favorite quotes? I don't think you've read any quotes yet.
I read a couple of quotes, but I mean, like, I loved that they had those little subtle references in there with the War of the Worlds and Alice in Wonderland and H.P. Lovecraft. Okay, there's one Janeway quote that really shocked me. Where she's talking to Tuvok and she says, "Sometimes, my friend, survival takes precedence over everything. I hate it like hell, but sometimes you just have to shoot the SOB and rationalize it later." And that line, I had to stop and think about hearing Catherine Janeway say that.
Yeah, I mean, she has been known to make some questionable decisions. They built whole episodes around um, her making a bad call and Chakotay standing up to her, but so it's not completely out of the question.
Yeah.
I like the little moment from Torres where she says that Kirk kind of line. I don't want him to. It's my pain, and I'm going to keep it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought about Star Trek V when she said that.
Yeah. I need my pain.
I need my pain. I like my pain. There were moments in here overall, so I guess
My favorite moment, my favorite moment, was actually quoting someone else who's not in the universe, not in the Star Trek universe. The universe, said the ancient Earth biologist J.B.S. Handlane, is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose.
That's a good line.
Yeah, my favorite.
Yeah. All right, so do you have anything else you want to talk about involving the Final Fury, Marty?
I mean, I think we've pretty much said all we can say about this novel. It wasn't the greatest one we've covered so far. Unfortunately, it gave Invasion kind of a lackluster finish, but, sometimes that happens.
Yeah, and right up to the finish, too, the ending, I thought, was just very,
Bizarre.
very bizarre to have it just end with Torres saying that, I mean, obviously,
How did
I didn't want
Minus what Torres said at the end.
I said I don't remember. Cold, defiant Klingon eyes burned into the Ocampan face. Kess understood, and she dropped the subject. Then the book just ends.
Okay, yeah. I mean, one way to end a book.
Yeah, just interesting that it didn't have a little more like, well, Voyager's going to go back on its way now. Let's get back towards the Alpha Quadrant. Let's have a memorial for Red Bay, who
Lieutenant,
died.
set course for home.
Yeah, but
Engage.
Red Bay died and they didn't do anything. It's like it's just very lackluster ending.
Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. What rating would you give this, Marty?
For this one, I would give it tough question. Probably, I would give it a warp 6. I enjoyed the storyline more than I enjoyed the characters in this book. The storyline was actually pretty engaging. It was just the characters that threw me off.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I'm a little slower there. I'm thinking more warp 5, cruising speed.
Cruising speed.
Yep.
All right, so if you're thinking about picking up the Invasion series, definitely pick up book 1, First Strike. And a lot of fans really like Time's Enemy as well. I know, Will, you loved it. I didn't like it as much, but I think the two weakest in this series are Soldiers of Fear and Final Fury.
I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, this has been great just talking about it. Even though we weren't that thrilled with it, it's just been a great series to talk about because this was the first time also that they did a crossover of such a grand extent. So this was the 30th anniversary crossover book series that covered all four television shows that existed at the time. So that concludes our Invasion Spectacular. Marty, why don't you tell us what we're going to be covering on the next... Applause, applause, applause. Marty, why don't you tell us what we're going to be covering next time on Reading Trek?
Next time on Reading Trek, we'll be covering IDW Comics Star Trek The Next Generation Mere Broken, issues 0 through 5.
Wow, is that a book?
Space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the ISS Enterprise. Its continuing mission to conquer strange new worlds, to enslave new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Return to the Mirror Universe with the Next Generation crew in a way you've never seen them before in Star Trek The Next Generation miniseries Mere Broken. Captain Jean-Luc Picard will stop at nothing to get his hands on the Terran Empire's newest starship, the Enterprise D, and no one had better stand in his way.
Oh, I can't wait. The artwork for this, when it premiered, absolutely blew me away. At STLV last year, we saw a lot of it there. At WonderCon earlier this year, we had an opportunity to chat with some of the creative minds behind this series. So we've got a really great show
I think we
put up.
should roll that interview when we record that episode.
Absolutely, and we're going to be joined by our good friend Shashanka Varu from Polytrek, so it's really going to be a fantastic time.
I always love having him on the show.
And he's like our comic book guru. We've got Heather, who's our Discovery guru. Yeah. We've got Jeff, who's our Gorn guru. And then we've got Shashank, who's our comic book guru.
There you go. I have a suspicion, Will, that this might be your favorite comic book you've ever read.
It definitely is there. I mean, I love it. And you're going to hear lots more about that next time. So in the meantime, if you would like to share your thoughts on this week's episode, then we would love to hear from you. Leave us a 2-minute voicemail at 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. You can also reach out to us by sending us a tweet at ReadingTrek or by email at readingtrekpodcast@gmail.com. As always, a list of our upcoming selections can be found on our website at readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. And please don't forget to leave us an iTunes review. We will love you for all time. And speaking of reaching out to us, Marty, how can people get a hold of you to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Twitter at Time Travel Marty. I'm also found on Facebook, but please remember, if I haven't met you in person, to send me a message so that I know who you are. Otherwise, I might just ignore the request. How about you, Will? Where can people find you?
Same here. You can find me on Twitter at William G. Conlin, and you can also find me in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas Facebook group, which is moderated by our tricorder transmission leaders, fearless leaders, Heather and Jeff, and our good friend Jesse. So please go on there, check out that amazing fan-based community. There's almost 5,000 members at this point. Even if you haven't been to the convention, go on there, learn all about it, and maybe we'll convince you to come on out one time.
And with that, Captain Picard wants us to let him read in peace.
I will leave you now to your book.
That is all I ask.